It may well be the most controversial pesticide in the world, glyphosate. But among farmers, the weed killer is extremely popular.
So the alternative to a product of glyphosate and not being able to grow a crop is starvation. So, you know, pick your poison.
Animal studies have shown a possible link to cancer. However, Europe recently renewed its approval for another 10 years. The name of an American scientist appears in the European Assessment Report.
Hier kom je in de samenvatting van het glyfosaat-toelatingsdossier ene Kenny Crump tegen.
We discover that this statistician has closer ties with the glyphosate manufacturer than he lets on.
I have never worked for a glyphosate industry. People that make glyphosate didn't pay me to write my papers. No one paid me to write my papers.
It's not that hard to find scientists who are willing to do your dirty work.
Zembla investigates the influence of the pesticide industry on the approval of glyphosate.
I love glyfosaat.
Dat is een mooi polariserend beetje, denk ik.
Je zegt ook hup glyfosaat, zeg je ook.
Monsanto has wielded out their whole PR machine because at the end of the day, what they're trying to make sure of is that Roundup remains on the market so they can continue to make billions of dollars.
We're in Central Valley on the US West Coast, a 3-hour drive from San Francisco. This is the American version of high-yield intensive agriculture. Orchards and plantations as far as the eye can see.
I won't say I'm not concerned about what we do because this is a family business. I'm here, my wife's here, my son's here.
Gary Martin is chair of the California Cotton Growers Association.
John, this is my son, Daniel.
Morning. Hi, nice to meet you. How are you doing? I'm fine.
Our job is to deliver clean cotton. I'm yielding 1,700 to 2,000 pounds to the acre.
And how much do you need for just one shirt?
Half a pound.
Half a pound.
So we could probably make a lot of shirts.
I think so.
Yeah. That's the cotton boll. And it gets spun into a yarn, and that yarn gets tightened up into a thread. And once it's into a thread, then they can weave a fabric. And once the fabric is woven, then they can cut and sew whatever product it is they want to make.
According to Martin, he can only achieve high yields by protecting his crops from fungi, bacteria, and weeds.
What's in the tank?
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate.
A mixture of water. We have genetically modified plants that are tolerant of it, and so we use it. It's reasonably priced compared to a lot of site-specific herbicides that are limited on the plants they work on, where the broadness of the effect of the glyphosate is a great value to us.
Monsanto introduced the herbicide glyphosate to the market in 1974 under the brand name Roundup. It's an immediate and unprecedented success with farmers, especially because Monsanto also develops genetically modified crops that are resistant to the poison. Everything dies except the plant. Glyphosate is the most widely sold pesticide in the world. But in recent years, the weed killer has come under increasing scrutiny. The question is it safe?
We don't do any more than we have to. We try to keep exposure at a minimum. We apply things below label when we can, but am I a scientist? No, I'm a farmer. This state has approved this product to be used here. And with the heavy regulations in California, if they're allowing us to use it, because there are plenty of products they don't allow us to use, I believe they're safe.
While the Martins kill off the weeds among their cotton plants and pistachio trees, thousands of other users in the US are suing Monsanto, claiming they became ill from using Roundup. To date, the multinational corporation has agreed settlements worth billions of dollars.
Why are there settlements?
Well, what do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah.
I think people can get sick from a lot of things. Yeah. And people do get sick. And there's a risk. A landscaper for a city school district used glyphosate all his life, and he ends up with cancer and dies. Well, I don't know what his shoes were. I don't know what his pants were. I don't know what kind of a spray bottle he used. I don't know how he used it all those years. And so somebody gets sick and dies, that's bad.
Op 16 november 2023 valt hier in Brussel een belangrijk besluit. De Europese Commissie keurt dan glyfosaat opnieuw voor 10 jaar goed. Je denkt misschien bij zoiets belangrijks als de goedkeuring van pesticiden spelen alleen wetenschappelijke argumenten een rol. Iets is veilig of iets is niet veilig. Maar zo simpel is het niet. Fabrikanten proberen de besluitvorming te beïnvloeden. En daarin gaan ze, zo blijkt uit ons onderzoek, heel ver.
To better understand how large corporations influence laws and regulations, we visit Naomi Oreskes. She's written a groundbreaking book on the subject, Merchants of Doubt.
It's called Merchants of Doubt because that's what these people do. They sell doubt. The term comes originally from an infamous tobacco industry memo, which was revealed in lawsuits in the United States, where one tobacco industry executive wrote in black and white on paper, doubt is our product because it's the most effective means of creating doubt about the science, of making people think the science is unsettled, and therefore they continue smoking. One of the things that's great about science, one of the things that's admirable about science is that it's a learning process. And that means that it's driven by curiosity and it's driven by what we could call healthy skepticism, that scientists don't take things on faith. They say, where's the evidence? Show me the evidence, prove to me that this claim is true. And that's a good thing.
So doubt is part of science?
Correct. It's part and parcel of doing scientific work. But what the tobacco industry realized was that they could flip that on its head and use doubt against science to say, oh, but you're not really sure. You haven't really proven this. What about this study? What about this person who disagrees? And to use that to undermine what was, in many cases, very solid, very robust science. Come on, girl, come on.
Oreskes is Professor of the History of Science at Harvard University. What we want to know is, does the pesticide industry also use doubt as a marketing tool?
Glyphosate is a very profitable product. Monsanto staked a lot of its reputation and a lot of its profits on this product and has had very aggressive marketing of glyphosate, and they have consistently insisted that glyphosate was safe. But we have scientific evidence to suggest that it may not be safe. And as you know, a big debate about whether it was a probable or possible carcinogen.
Monsanto did everything, whether it's fighting it in the press, whether it's fighting us in scientific circles, or whether it's fighting it in court. They're doing everything in their power in order to keep Roundup on the market. When you set on a path to take on one of the largest corporations in the world, you have to have a little bit of tenacity and determination. We had a very long, thought-out battle before we got to the courthouse steps.
In San Francisco federal court in 2019, attorney Jennifer Moore won a landmark lawsuit against Monsanto, the Hardeman case.
I remember when sitting there at trial, along with my co-counsel Amy Wagstaff, these two women who took on this giant, multinational corporation, and they had at any time probably 40 lawyers in the courtroom against us. And we beat them.
For the second time, a jury has found Monsanto's Roundup weed killer played a role in causing cancer.
A jury awarding $80 million to a man who says Roundup weed killer caused his cancer. With 70-year-old Edwin Hardiman, who says that Roundup was a major factor in his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
This is a big loss for Bayer and Monsanto. It proves that juries are being convinced that Roundup is causing cancer.
I was the lead negotiator for settlements of 14,000 cancer victims in 2020, and then that led to settlements where Monsanto and Bayer acknowledged they paid over $11 billion to cancer victims in the United States alone.
According to Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, the settlements are in no way an admission of guilt.
Bayer paid over $11 billion in settlements for a product they're now saying there's no evidence it causes cancer. I mean, come on. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Feel good.
Rodney Berry from Western Kentucky was one of Jennifer Moore's first clients.
Don't take scans anymore, so...
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah. Lucky to be alive. Woke up one morning and my ear was on fire. It was red as anything red you could ever see. Couldn't touch it. I mean, just looked like it was going to bleed. It was that red.
And what did the doctor say?
He thought he was shocked I was walking. I had that many tumors.
All over?
All over.
No, really?
Mm-hmm.
All over?
I had 7.
I didn't know if we'd be standing here 7 years ago.
Most people thought I'd be dead. Worst thing I had,
yeah,
I had a tumor in my kidney, and they had to go in and cut it out, and that was horrible.
As a young man, Berry worked both on the farm and in an agricultural supply store.
1974, Monsanto rep, I won't call his name, but he walked in there and set a jug on the counter, and I happened to be at the store that day, and he said, this is going to be the future of the ag business. And it's Roundup. And this flat said it's the safest thing that's ever been produced in this world, and you can actually drink it if you had to.
And that's what stood out to me. So I remember Rodney telling me that story of how Monsanto first introduced the product to the farming community. And so I heard it directly from Rodney first, and that's what led us to be filing the lawsuits.
Rodney Berry is convinced that he became ill due to years of exposure to glyphosate while spraying in the fields and working in the store. He sues Monsanto. Following lengthy proceedings, the multinational reaches a settlement with Berry.
The cancer guy on me says take it off the market. The farmer side of me says, if we don't have it, what are we going to use to raise a crop? Because the weeds, if the weeds take the crop, then...
After several operations and intensive chemotherapy, Berry is now doing well. He's back at work in the store.
Are you still selling Roundup?
Yeah.
You're still selling Roundup?
Yeah. You have to if you're in the ag retail business in the United States. Have to. I don't touch it, but I got people at work back there to do it, yeah. That's pretty sad, isn't it?
Despite the billions of dollars in settlements, glyphosate continues to sell as strongly as ever, even though scientists at IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, conclude as early as 2015 that the chemical is probably carcinogenic.
IARC is the International Agency for Research on Cancer. It is an arm of the World Health Organization,
whose job it is to review the scientific evidence and determine whether or not something is carcinogenic. And so they're the people who have proven or have concluded that, for example, asbestos is a known carcinogen. Tobacco is a known carcinogen.
And IARC assembled back in 2015 a group of scientists from all over the world who are not attached to industry, who are not hired by Monsanto. These are independent people, and they gather together to evaluate all of the data over the years of glyphosate. And based on their review of all of the data, they determined that there was evidence to show it is a probable human carcinogen.
This classification, probably carcinogenic, is bad news for Monsanto. The company's response is revealed by internal documents requested in the run-up to the Hardeman lawsuit. They're known as the Monsanto Papers.
It's millions and millions of pages, and then we have to sift through that to try to find, the smoking gun, so to speak.
What the so-called Monsanto documents show is that the industry, Monsanto in particular, put enormous pressure on the scientists involved and in the whole debate around it to prevent glyphosate from being interpreted as a carcinogen.
Someone else who studied the Monsanto Papers extensively is Gary Ruskin of the research group US Right to Know.
There's a big story behind this. Monsanto, for months and months, was very worried when they found out that IARC was going to review glyphosate, because they knew from their own research that there's problems with cancer and liver disease and endocrine disruption and other things.
Since the 1980s, animal studies conducted by the industry itself have shown that some mice develop cancer after being exposed to glyphosate.
So they prepared very extensively to try to have a campaign to what they called orchestrate outcry. That's a quote from their documents, in order to try to defend and protect glyphosate. So here's Monsanto's public relations plan.
And what does that mean, orchestrate outcry?
It means to have 1,000 voices to speak the same words, which are, this is not true, and defend glyphosate.
Protect the reputation and FTO of Roundup by communicating the safety of glyphosate. So, you see things like this all the time. They're not trying to find out the truth. They don't say, we're going to do everything we can to find out the truth about this product, and if it's dangerous, then we'll take it off the market, which is what a responsible company should do. Instead, it's, we're going to communicate the safety. So the assumption is up front. It's not based on the science. It's based upon trying to protect the reputation of the company.
The Monsanto offensive targets German scientist Kurt Streif.
Freiburg Süd.
He was responsible for the IARC research program.
Monsanto put out a statement saying this is junk science, this is cherry picking. It was the most massive attack ever. And
really?
Yeah, also the longest lasting attack.
Stronger than when you looked into tobacco, secondhand smoke, and stuff like that?
Yes, and stronger than meat consumption, stronger than whatever. The colleagues received letters asking them to release all kinds of emails and information. If you decline to provide the files, we request and instruct you immediately to take all reasonable steps.
Monsanto's lawyers demand access to internal IARC documents in preparation for legal proceedings.
There was a lawyer from Monsanto calling, and he would urgently want to speak with me. Of course, it was meant to intimidate, because they immediately realized that this could impact their business.
Articles are published criticizing IARC, including one by an American researcher, Henry Miller, a name that also appears in the Monsanto Papers.
When Monsanto says something about glyphosate, nobody's going to believe them, because they have such an enormous conflict of interest. So they especially want to find third-party academics who have a veneer of credibility and speak Monsanto's words through their mouths. So here's one of the more famous examples of ghostwriting. It's about a guy named Henry Miller, who wrote an article for Forbes basically saying that IARC was incorrect and that glyphosate is safe. And so here's Eric Sachs from Monsanto asking, Henry, are you interested in writing more on the topic of the IARC panel? And then Henry Miller writes back, I would be if I could start from a high-quality draft. Eric Sachs from Monsanto writes back, well, we've nearly done. We'll send it to you by tomorrow. And then here's our draft. Still quite rough, but it's a good start for your magic. This is a form of lying to the scientific community and to the public, where we find out, oh, no, it wasn't really these independent scientists who wrote the paper. It was actually Monsanto scientists who wrote the paper, and they have huge conflicts of interest, but we didn't tell you about that.
This phenomenon is called ghostwriting.
This is the evidence that we presented.
Monsanto co-writes numerous scientific articles that downplay the toxicity of glyphosate.
But we would be keeping the cost down by us doing the writing, meaning Monsanto doing the writing.
We ghostwrite the exposure tox and genotox sections. So in other words, these people who work for Monsanto are going to ghostwrite these articles, and then they're going to find scientists who will be willing to put their names on it. So that's just straight out corruption, just straight out corruption.
Welke termen zijn we tegengekomen? Goedgekeurde werkzame stof.
Gereedschap in de toolbox.
Pesticiden.
Rotzooi.
Do we encounter the industry's PR message here in the Netherlands as well? We ask researchers at Leiden University to analyze the Dutch glyphosate debate.
Hoe is dit onderwerp nou op de agenda gekomen en vooral in welke woorden is dit onderwerp op de agenda gekomen?
What arguments are being used?
Bedrijfszekerheid.
And who is leading the discussion on reapproving the chemical?
Framing betekent dat mensen bewust of onbewust onderdelen van een discussie achterwege laten of juist overbelichten om daarmee een bepaalde richting te geven aan het debat.
In October 2023, the Dutch House of Representatives holds a hearing on glyphosate. It's shortly before European member states must decide whether the weed killer is allowed to stay on the market.
Goedemiddag allemaal. Het gaat vandaag over glyfosaat.
According to an agricultural scientist, we cannot do without it.
Gewasbescherming is wat ons betreft nog steeds een noodzakelijk kwaad.
The House has invited the director of the Pesticide Authority, CTGB, to attend.
Glyfosaat is geen neurotoxische stof.
A representative of glyphosate manufacturers also speaks.
Op dit moment is het verantwoord gebruik van glyfosaat een deel van de toolbox van de onkruidbeheersing waarover land- en tuinbouwers beschikken.
Glyfosaat als gereedschap in je toolbox, die was sterk.
Waarom?
Wij kunnen niks anders. Wij hebben het glyfosaat nodig om te blijven produceren. En dat dan in verbinding met wat andere frames is het goedgekeurde werkzame stof. Was ook een hele sterke. En ik denk die twee samen maakt dat het debat ook die kant op getrokken wordt.
Ik heb een vraag voor de heer Van Andel.
A crop farmer has also been invited. Michiel van Andel.
Het is echt een no-brainer in mijn ogen dat een verbod nu op glyfosaat dat alleen maar negatieve gevolgen heeft. In eerste plaats gaan er veel meer andere herbiciden gebruikt worden.
Hier staat, de boer gaat andere herbiciden gebruiken. Er ontstaat dus een verhoogd gebruik van andere, minder effectieve en in veel gevallen relatief schadelijkere herbiciden. Dus hij framet eigenlijk glyfosaat als de beste optie, het meest veilige, het makkelijkst in gebruik en het effectiefst.
Het systeem brengt automatisch in kaart wie de meeste posts op het platform X heeft met het woord glyfosaat.
When we analyze who has tweeted the most about glyphosate over the past 2 years, we come across the crop farmer from the hearing, Michiel van Andel, also known as the blogging farmer. We notice he often stresses that other chemicals are more toxic than glyphosate.
En dan zie je bijvoorbeeld ook paracetamol daarbij staan, cafeïne, vitamine D. Dus dat zijn stuk voor stuk volgens hem dan stoffen die schadelijker zouden zijn dan glyfosaat.
If the pesticide industry stands up in public and says, oh, pesticides are perfectly fine, they're safe, they know that many of us will be skeptical of that. But if a farmer testifies in the Dutch parliament or appears on television or even maybe writes a piece for a newspaper and the farmer says, well, I really need these pesticides. It's tough being a farmer. It's hard to make a living as a farmer, and without these pesticides, my crop will be eaten by, by pests.
Yeah.
That's something that many of us would feel sympathetic to. And so the industry recruits people like farmers to make the claim for them.
Michiel?
Hey, dag Michiel van Andel. Je spreekt met Vincent Harmsen van Zembla.
Ik heb absoluut 0 belangstelling om met jou te praten.
Van Andel later confirms that Caroline van der Plas of the Pro-Farmer Party invited him to the hearing. He says he does not receive any money from the industry.
Welkom bij een speciale zomereditie van Eten is Weten.
Toevallig sprak ik vandaag een aardappelboer vanochtend. Die zei zonder bestrijdingsmiddelen hadden we geen aardappelen gehad dit jaar.
Hidde Boersma is a microbiologist and publicist. He is pro-glyphosate, as we see on social media. Why is he so outspoken? Boersma is only willing to speak to us on his own podcast.
Ik heb meerdere tweets van jou gevonden. Jij zegt gewoon dat het onschadelijk is, dat het veilig is voor mensen. Ja, dat heb jij gezegd.
Waar staat dat?
Voor mensen is het niet gevaarlijk, maar drink het niet, zegt hij dan wel bij mij. Hij zegt ook, I love glyfosaat.
Dat was een mooi polariserend tweetje, denk ik.
Je zegt ook, hup glyfosaat, zeg je ook.
He frequently takes on paid jobs for companies like Bayer.
Jij krijgt geld van dit soort multinationals?
Nou ja, zeker. Als ik ergens spreek, of het nou bij een biologisch bedrijf is of bij Bayer, word ik daarvoor betaald.
Je vertelt het narratief van de industrie, ja. Je wordt betaald door de industrie.
Ik zie dat je me graag wil framen daarin. Dat heb je
nee, maar geef eens antwoord op.
Ik wil af van het hele frame. Alles wat grote bedrijven doen is slecht en alles wat kleine biologische bedrijven is goed. Dus ik word voor die hele reeks die betaalt. Ja. Dus het is van biologisch tot en met Syngenta.
Ja, maar hoe onafhankelijk ben je op het moment dat je je laat betalen door de industrie?
Ik ben volledig onafhankelijk. Mijn mening is onafhankelijk van wat iemand ook vindt.
Boersma's message is that intensive arable farming using chemical pesticides is the most sustainable method, as it supposedly creates space for wild nature. He promotes this story at numerous government and business conferences.
Ik zeg I love glyfosaat omdat ik geloof dat dat vrij veilig is ten opzichte van andere dingen. Want als ik zeg ik ben een fan van conventionele landbouw, ben ik niet per se fan van lelieteelt en helemaal niet van paraquat. Dus ik verzet me ook tegen allerlei bestrijdingsmiddelen. Alleen allemaal waarom ik hier toch een klein beetje liefde voor verklaar is omdat het zo symbool is geworden voor de strijd.
Denk jij dat hij een spreekbuis is voor Bayer?
Ik denk zeker dat de industrie heel erg blij is met wat Hidde.
Maar denk je dat Hidde een spreekbuis is?
Hij is op dit moment, hij vertolkt het industriegeluid.
Glyphosate has been approved for use for another 10 years. The Dutch Pesticide Authority, CTGB, played a key role in the European review. We interviewed director Ingrid Becks about this earlier in the year.
Is glyfosaat kankerverwekkend?
Nee.
Nee?
Nee, met alle kennis die wij nu hebben is de conclusie dat glyfosaat niet kankerverwekkend is.
En waar baseert u dat op?
Op het hele dossier wat we net weer hebben herbeoordeeld en alle gegevens die daarin zitten.
For the past few months, we've been studying that glyphosate report. And in doing so, have come across the name of an American statistician.
En hier zie je, een van de auteurs die wordt geciteerd is Kenny Crump. Als je dan gaat napluizen wie is die Kenny Crump, dan kom je op een hele trits aan interessante publicaties. Hij blijkt voor allerlei controversiële industrieën onderzoek te hebben gedaan en te hebben gepubliceerd. En dat gaat onder meer over de asbestindustrie. Dat gaat over de loodindustrie. Dat gaat over fabrikanten van diesel.
We discover a common thread running through his scientific work.
Ja, je ziet dus telkens dat hij betaald door de industrie wijst op de onzekerheid en op de twijfel die er bestaat dat mensen daadwerkelijk ziek worden van allerlei schadelijke blootstellingen.
Bing, 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 red flag, red flag, red flag. This is a man who wrote papers defending benzene, defending asbestos. These are known carcinogens. Is he an incredible genius, smarter than everyone else? It's possible, but is that really the most plausible interpretation? Probably not.
Who is Kenny Crump? And will he talk to us about his noteworthy role in the glyphosate report? We are welcome to visit him in Ruston, Louisiana.
Turn left right out here.
First, Crump takes us to his good friend Joe Mitchum's peach farm. The orchard is not being sprayed with glyphosate today, but with a cocktail of insecticides and fungicides.
No bite.
No pesticides on them?
They're washed and clean.
Good. Very tasteful.
Mitchum tells us that he mainly uses glyphosate in late spring.
This is 59%.
Of glyphosate?
Right.
How cautious are you when you are applying it?
Well, I stay out of the spray mist.
I have an actual covered spray boom that I use, because if it's blowing on me, it's blowing on the tree, and it could, you know, damage the tree also.
So what do you think, Mr. Crump? Is this safe?
Well, my research didn't find any evidence that it was cancer-causing.
It's safe if used properly.
And what did you find in animal studies?
There was no evidence that it was cancerous.
No evidence in animal studies?
No.
No tumors?
Well, they found lots of tumors, but you know, they weren't related to glyphosate, as far as I can tell.
In 2020, statistician Crump publishes an article in which he asserts that it's not at all certain that the laboratory animals developed cancer from glyphosate. According to him, the tumors could have occurred by chance.
The more data you have, the more things appear to be carcinogenic just by chance. We have more data on glyphosate than any other chemical, so that's a very big problem for glyphosate.
How certain are you that there is no relationship?
Look, I provide my normal statistical techniques. We have certain scientific standards we go by.
Yeah.
Glyphosate did not meet those standards for causation.
The approval report cites another article by Crump. It states that farmers who say they became ill due to glyphosate do not remember just how often they came into contact with the weed killer.
The human studies are affected by recall bias.
Right. About how much they used Roundup. Are people going to be able to say, on Tuesday, June 8th, 1982, I sprayed this much Roundup? No, I mean, that would be ridiculous. But they can say, you know, I bought this farm in 1980, and the Monsanto sales rep came by and visited me and told me what an effective weed killer this is, and I started using it.
Did Bayer or Monsanto ever ask you to do any work for them?
Not on glyphosate. I may have done some work for them 30 years ago. I'm not real sure, but I think I may have 30 years ago or more, 30 or 40 years ago.
On other chemicals?
Right.
Kenny Crump, that's you.
Crump did not write his article about the animal studies alone.
Casey Crump, that's your son?
That's my son.
And Joseph Hazeman.
Yeah.
Who is Joseph Hazeman?
Joseph Hazeman is a statistician who worked for the...
He worked for Monsanto.
That's true, but he said he did not work for Monsanto when he was working on our paper.
He insists that the pesticide industry did not influence his articles in any way.
I've never worked for a glyphosate industry. People that make glyphosate didn't pay me to write my papers. No one paid me to write my papers.
When we ask questions about his paid jobs for other big companies, his mood shifts.
I thought we were going to be talking about glyphosate here.
Crump previously served as an expert witness for asbestos producers.
I did testify for those people.
You did testify?
I believe so.
Paid by the asbestos industry?
Yes.
This raises the question, why is the Dutch Pesticide Authority adopting the conclusions from a scientist who worked for the asbestos industry and co-wrote his article with a Monsanto consultant?
We hebben alle informatie die er is, die betrekken we in het dossier. We kijken overal
maar dan wil je
naar,
toch wel, je wilt toch betrouwbare
ook op.
Ja, maar dan wil je wel betrouwbare informatie gebruiken.
Zeker.
Van betrouwbare wetenschappers.
Zeker.
Vindt u meneer Crump een betrouwbare wetenschapper?
U overvraagt me op dit moment, want ik ken natuurlijk niet de hele beoordeling uit mijn hoofd, heb die zelf ook niet gedaan. Dus daar kan ik op dit moment geen goede reactie op geven.
We continue our investigation into the pesticide industry's PR machine. The Monsanto papers reveal that the chemical company reached out to a journalist at the international news agency Reuters with the goal of discrediting IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer.
This is part of a very broad attack on the credibility and in fact, the existence, the very existence of IARC. Like they tried to destroy, burn IARC down.
Reuters then publishes an article stating that one of the IARC researchers involved withheld key information.
So the story was essentially that Aaron Blair, who's a top cancer scientist, hid information about the safety of glyphosate. And if that information would have been available to IARC, their ruling would have been different and better to Monsanto.
We were all shocked about her writing. It was clearly following a certain script and a certain strategy.
Reuters journalist Kelland writes that she is citing court documents, but her source turns out to be Monsanto.
So here we see Sam Murphy, who's a top PR person from Monsanto, sending a note to Kate Kelland. Kate, we're sending these things exclusively to you for your review. So that's how she got it. She said that the source was court documents when we see right here clearly that the source was the Monsanto PR person, and that's deceitful.
There's nothing wrong with talking to the PR agent, but you have to know that that's who they are and that their job is to spin the story in Monsanto's interest. And so the point is it has to be viewed skeptically.
The same Reuters journalist writes in another article that IARC omitted pro-glyphosate results.
Oh, I'm sure they loved it. They're probably opening champagne bottles. I mean, that's exactly what they want, right? To get the journalists to do their dirty work for them. They're getting the journalists to claim that the World Health Organization did something inappropriate.
There was nothing removed. We want to rely only on studies that are in details available publicly. This is not the case for these industry studies, and Monsanto was aware of that. That's why they wanted to make these studies kind of eligible, that they are published in a peer-reviewed article. And then the working group carefully looked at these, and there are the typical criteria, what you want to know if certain study findings are indeed valid or not. And there was not enough information to make that judgment.
In response to our detailed questions, the news agency gives this brief statement. Reuters has covered Monsanto independently, fairly, and robustly, and will continue to do so. The Reuters news item is widely picked up. Shortly after it appears, a science journalist at the Volkskrant newspaper tweets, "Talk about shocking. Did you hear that IARC manipulated glyphosate data?" He writes about it 3 times in the paper, as recently as last November. Reuters journalists discovered that evidence clearing glyphosate was mysteriously removed from the IARC report.
It's false. It's just sloppy reporting. If they read the source documents, they would know it's just not true.
October 2023. Europe must decide whether glyphosate is allowed to stay on the market. In an editorial, the Volkskrant writes, reports of a link with cancer prove to be in no way scientifically substantiated.
In no way to be scientifically substantiated. I mean, that's incredibly sloppy journalism. And you know, we have a webpage which links some of the key highlights of the links between cancer and glyphosate, and there are many of them.
There is one organization we encounter many times in our investigation, the Genetic Literacy Project.
So this is a group that claimed to be independent, that claim to be fact-checking, that claim to be defending science, but in fact they're partnering with and being paid by Monsanto to promote pro-pesticide views.
Its ties to the industry are evident from the Monsanto papers.
Here is Monsanto saying that one of its key industry partners is the Genetic Literacy Project. They're a PR front group for Bayer and Monsanto and for the agrochemical industry, but they're extremely sophisticated and they carry a lot of weight because their articles rank very high in Google.
They frequently publish on glyphosate, repeating the same frames we encounter in the Dutch debate, that coffee is more toxic, that alternatives are more harmful, and that a ban would have a major economic impact.
In the Netherlands, in a quality newspaper, it's called an independent fact-check site.
Yeah, that's just totally false.
If a journalist is saying that, I would say it's grossly irresponsible that they didn't do their homework, because you don't have to do a lot of digging. I mean, lots of other journalists have written about the Genetic Literacy Project.
So here is their 2020-21 tax returns. And so here's their contributors, and you see here's a $100,000 contribution from Bayer to the Genetic Literacy Project.
We ask the Volkskrant for a response. The editor-in-chief informs us in writing, "It is abundantly clear that glyphosate has harmful effects, especially on nature. It is equally clear that the industry is attempting to influence both science and journalism. We are aware of this, and your broadcast highlights it once again, giving much food for thought. But after examining the scientific studies extensively, we have found no conclusive evidence so far that glyphosate causes cancer." Back to Kenny Crump, the statistician who told us earlier that he had never worked for the glyphosate industry. Yet, a written response from Bayer, received shortly before the broadcast, suggests otherwise.
Bayer die heeft laten weten dat zij wel degelijk de diensten van Kenny Crump hebben ingeschakeld. Dus Crump heeft Bayer bijgestaan tijdens rechtszaken die in Australië worden gevoerd, waar het bedrijf ook wordt aangeklaagd.
We contact Crump once again.
You said that you had never worked for the glyphosate industry, but that's not true, is it?
No, it's not true. To set the record straight, I worked for 2 years, March 2021. I worked off and on through October 23rd.
Why did you keep that hidden?
I must have been upset because of the questioning you were asking me, but that was certainly not true.
How much did they pay you for this work?
I made 3 trips to Australia. I was paid $500 an hour. I don't recall the total amount. It was several $100,000 over a period of 3 years.